Shade is the newest Epic Brawler coming to the game, and it is the third and final member of the Ghost Train trio along with Gus and Chuck. Shade is just a pile of clothes that somehow gains sentient thinking power. He came to life at some point. We're not sure who or what caused it to happen. What we do know is that Gus found it, so it was him that named it Shade. And the two of them can stay close, haunting the Ghost Station together. Shade's main attack is Haunted Hug. It swings its arms together in a fan shape and the arms collide in the center of the attack. Anything within its range will immediately take damage, similar to BB's main attack, but the enemies that are caught in the center of the attack will take double the damage. Now, the numbers that tell you how much damage has been dealt will turn orange if Shade hits something in the middle of the attack. And it looks like that's actually a feature that is added to the other attacks in the game as well. Another interesting thing about this attack is that it can go through walls, just like Jackie, Doug, or RT's attacks. However, different from their attacks, there's a short delay between firing the attack and it actually landing, sort of like Ash's attack. Shade's super is incorporeal form. Shade dashes forward and turns incorporeal. While incorporeal, it is able to move through walls. Additionally, he's able to dash forward, which doesn't deal any damage or knock enemies back, but it does help it get closer to enemies. If Shade's super runs out while it's inside of a wall, it will be pushed out of it to whichever side it's closest to. I should also mention that if this happens, its healing will be interrupted even though it doesn't deal any damage to it, so keep that in mind. In addition to being able to travel through walls, when Shade activates its super, it gets a buff to its movement speed the whole time that it is invisible. I'm not sure if this will be fixed later or not since it seems a little broken, but this speed buff actually stacks. So if you charge another super while it's invisible, it gets even faster and faster and faster and faster, though it's unlikely to happen like it does in this clip in real life. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to charge it with super more than maybe twice. Shade's first gadget is Long Arms. This gadget simply increases the range of Shade's next attack by 50%. This includes the area that deals normal damage as well as the strip in the middle that deals double damage. It actually reaches to where his supercharge ring is, which is kind of satisfying. Shade's second gadget is Jump Scare. When this gadget is activated, enemies that are close to Shade will be slowed for 4 seconds. Usually gadgets like this will show you its range, like if you kind of like hover over the button, hold it down, but this one doesn't, so you'll just have to memorize its range and hope that they fix that. This gadget is similar to Barley's gadget, and it can slow brawlers through walls. Shade's first star power is Spooky Speedster. With this star power equipped, Shade gains a small buff to its movement speed every time it hits an enemy in the center of its attack. It hardly lasts for even a second, but even if it hits multiple targets, it will get buffed for each individual hit. Now, this won't increase the time of the buff, but it does increase how fast he moves for that second. Shade's second star power is Hardened Hoodie. This star power gives Shade a shield whenever it's incorporeal, and the shield reduces all damage dealt by 30%. Now, unlike the speed boost, the shield does not stack, so no matter how many times you use its super, it will still only be reduced by 30% damage. Now, I've already mentioned that Shade has a supercharge circle around it like the ones that Buzz, Lily, and Cordelius have, but that's only one of its 2 traits. Shade also has the ability to float over water, whether he's incorporeal or not. That technically makes him the 5th brawler in the game that can do this, since RT recently got a buff so that it can do it as well. Now it's time to go through Shade's Olympic tests, starting with its worst test and making our way up to its best test and comparing the stats to every other brawler in the game. First up, we have the super range test. As I mentioned before, Shade's super doesn't even do anything to enemies, but the dash does obviously have some range. It reaches across 3 tiles exactly, so that puts Shade in 79th place out of the 86 brawlers in the game. Yes, just confirmed, 86 brawlers in the game. Next, we have the attack range test. Normally, Shade only reaches 3 1/3 tiles across with his attack, which is the same length as BB's attack, actually, so that's a really good reference because they're very similar. But his first gadget increases the range to 5 tiles exactly, so he actually ties with Bull, Miko, and Ash for 72nd place. Ash is another good comparison because the attack is similar. Next is the super damage test. Shade's super deals no damage and is strictly for utility, but fortunately, 17 other brawlers in the game also have supers that don't deal any damage, so it ties with them for 69th 7th place. Nice. Next is the 1 second DPS test. Because of the delay on Shade's attacks, it's only able to unload 2 attacks before his 1 second is up. Each shot hits in the center, so it deals 6,400 damage in total. That puts him in 63rd place. For the supercharge test, if an enemy is within Shade's range, it's already going to be charging its super a little bit, but each hit charges its super about 25%, even if the attack doesn't deal double damage. So it takes 4 shots from Shade to charge its super, which it takes exactly 3 seconds. So that puts him in 57th place. Next is the boss test. Now Shade does not get any help from his super or its gadgets, so its main attack is really all that it can do to defeat the boss. Even though Shade's burst damage is kind of slow due to the delay of its attacks, its reload speed is one of the fastest in the game. So Shade can deal consistent damage over a long period of time, even just with its main attack. It defeats the boss in 43.6 seconds and gets 53rd place, which is impressive for just relying on its attack. Next is the area test. Shade is able to break 32 skulls with its attack, and with its increased range from its gadget, it can break an additional 17 skulls. Its super doesn't break any skulls, but it does allow it to go through them, so that's kind of cool. That's a total of 49 skulls. That puts Shade in 51st place. I just realized it's the only brawler that can travel through skulls without breaking them, obviously. So that's unique. First place for the walking through skull test. Next is the assassin test. As we've seen in other damage tests, Shade only has its main attack to use in the assassin test. It can unload 4 attacks before the 3 seconds have passed, which deals 12,800 damage in total. That is enough to put it in 49th place. So far, Shade has been worse than half of the brawlers, and now for the rest of these tests, he is better than half of them. Make sure you stick around for all of its voice lines. Next is the survival test. This is the only test where Shade's second star power actually helps out a little bit. It blocks 30% of the damage for a few seconds while it's using its super, and then it's able to charge its super again just by standing close to the sniper bot. So I let it use a second super before it finally was defeated. Additionally, Shade has 7,000 total health, which is as much as Chester, so it survives for 22.3 seconds, and that puts it in 41st place. Next is the auto aim test. Shade is able to auto aim and land its attack at max range because of how wide the range is. However, it doesn't actually hit the middle of the attack, so you might have to aim the attack a little bit, even for like a short range, if you want to do maximum damage. With the help of its first gadget, Shade reaches across 5 tiles and deals 1,600 damage to Nita, so that ties it with Clancy for 32nd place. Next is the 3 attack kill test. One of Shade's attacks can deal 3,200 damage, so 3 of them adds up to 9,600 damage, as long as they all land in the center. That is enough damage to take out 74 brawlers in the game out of the 86, and that is what I would expect from an assassin. Shade ties with Rico, Dynamite, and Ash, and Sam for 31st place. Next was the reload test. Now, I've already mentioned Shade's slow unload speed, and his reload speed is really, really fast, but the unload speed is so slow, so it takes Shade 14.3 seconds to reload 10 shots, and it gets 19th place. It's still very fast, but it's how quickly he's able to unload it that kind of keeps him back. Next, we have the splash test. Shade is able to hit every box with its main attack, but only the 2 middle rows take double the damage. It uses its first star power to quickly scoop up the power cubes, and then it only takes 2 more shots to break open the rest of the boxes. Shade completes the splash test in 5.2 seconds, which puts it in 15th place. Next is the race test. So technically, I could stack Shade's speed all the way up to max and then race from like the finish lines like that. I felt that was just way too unfair, though it is very fun. Realistically, Shade already has a very fast movement speed. It gets a speed boost at the start from its super and then charges another super off the swarm boss before crossing the finish line. Shade finishes the race test in 7.1 seconds and ties it with Janet for 7th place. Next is the swarm test. Now, Shade doesn't even need to hit the bots in the middle of its attack in order to destroy the bots, so it can take out multiple rows at once. It takes it no less than 3 hits to clear them, all whether or not the first gadget is activated, so it doesn't use it. Shade defeats the swarm in 2.2 seconds, and that puts it in 6th place. Next is the box test. Similar to the swarm test, Shade's first gadget is unnecessary in this test since there aren't any groups of boxes that it can't hit with the same time with its normal attack. Not only can it hit all the boxes, but it can actually deal double damage to every box in every group when the attack is aimed right. Shade completes the box test in 23.1 seconds and ties with El Primo for 5th place. So the question is, how good is Shade going to be in each of the game modes? Let's talk about it and then show you all of its spooky voice lines. First up, we have Gem Grab, and Shade might be the best assassin in the game for Gem Grab for a lot of different reasons. Its super is going to make it nearly impossible for enemies to get control of the map as long as there are at least a few walls that it can play around, okay? Shade will also be the best brawler for getting away with enemy gems after defeating an enemy gem carrier in their spawn, because being able to go through walls creates so many shortcuts, especially with a speed boost. It's almost impossible for many brawlers to even hit while it's inside of a wall, so that can even buy Shade's team a lot of time to try and turn the game around, if nothing else, right? Also, let's just keep in mind that Shade can hard counter throwers, which we'll probably talk about more in Bounty and Knockout. S tier for Gem Grab though, for sure. Brawl Ball, also S tier. Obviously, one of the first things I had to know was whether or not Shade could bring the ball through walls. And unfortunately, thankfully, he cannot. That would have been way too broken. Instead of going through the walls with him, it lets go of the ball and the ball just sits against the wall that it went through. I think this actually might cause some problems for some people because we're so used to moving against the wall with the ball I think that some people are just going to drop the balls on accident, because otherwise you have to purposefully move around the wall. And if you just accidentally touch the wall, anyway, you get the point. That being said, Shade's super still obviously gives it the potential to make insanely easy goals with passes from either itself or its teammates, so I'm going to give it S tier for Brawl Ball as well. As for Heist, we're going to go with A tier. Shade does not deal the most damage over time, but it does enough to still be a good heist brawler. More importantly, I feel like if it has the right size walls to hide behind, it'll be nearly impossible to get Shade out of your spawn and away from your safe. The fact that its attack is AoE and can hit multiple targets at once is also great for this mode. I think A tier is very fine for heist. For Bounty, we're going to go with B tier. Depending on how many walls are on the map, there may be some situations where Shade is a good bounty brawler, but I think that it will probably be one of its worst modes unless you use it to be a counter for throwers. Simply because most maps are pretty open and Shade has no long range attacks or even a super that can safely get close to enemies. Even if it's able to get a few kills, it'll be kind of hard for it to escape because a lot of the time you'll probably be using your super to get too close to enemies, and then escaping is a little bit tricky. I'd say it'll be strong enough for B tier for Bounty, like I said, to counter some good throwers. Hot Zone, we're going to go with B tier as well. I will first quickly point out that Shade is able to be an absolute menace on maps that have walls inside the zone, especially parallel play. But I think that it'll be the opposite experience on maps that don't have walls on or around the zone, because it just doesn't have the range to be able to get enemies out of the zone. And enemies will just poke at it from a distance until it's either pushed out or dead, right? So it's going to be hard to stay inside the zone for a long time. I'm really tempted to give it A tier, but I'm going to go with B tier because of how map dependent it is. As for Knockout, we are going to go with A tier, one above Bounty. I can't think of a single Knockout map that doesn't have really good walls for Shade to play around and use for cover. And like I said, being able to counter throwers is absolutely huge in Knockout. And also, there's a lot of maps in Knockout where water can come to play, and being able to move on water is a huge asset depending on the map. I don't think that it will be hard for Shade to survive long enough for the smoke to roll in, and as long as it does, Shade is going to be really hard to kill, especially with a shield from its second star power. I think A tier in Knockout makes a lot of sense. For Solo Showdown, we're going to go with A tier. Shade's going to have to be a pretty good bush camper, but that's kind of what assassins do in Solo Showdown, and I think that Shade is going to do that very well. It'll be able to charge its super without anyone even knowing, and it'll be able to escape from all kinds of situations where other brawlers would be trapped. Shade doesn't have the range or the abilities that can instantly save it from other surprise attacks, so I can't give it S tier, but A tier for Solo Showdown should be fine. As for Duo Showdown, we'll go with A tier, simply because assassins typically struggle a little bit to dealing with multiple enemies at once, but its attacks can deal with multiple enemies at once, and its super will probably be charged twice as fast without enemies even knowing. I could see it being really just like good at staying alive even if a teammate goes down, which is obviously great for Duo Showdown and can turn matches around for sure. I still don't think it's S tier. Like I said, maybe even B tier. I think A tier actually makes a lot of sense. Now, the biggest thing that I'm worried about is that perhaps I'm underestimating the fact that Shade's abilities allow it to increase its movement speed. I wasn't able to test Shade against real players, so I'm not 100% sure how fast Shade is going to be able to get consistently, but does Shade seem too strong? Maybe balance? Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. But let's check out all of Shade's voice lines and pins.